Back here at home now, two people are dead after what police are calling an apparent murder-suicide in South Toledo. The shooting happened around 9 Wednesday morning at Boulder Creek Apartments off South Burn Road. Police got to the complex and found two people shot. 37-year-old Ashley Fonseca was treated at the scene and taken to a nearby hospital. She died yesterday.
I can't take this mother always threatening me. He's gonna punch me in my face and knock my teeth out, and my kids are gonna be motherless. Constantly putting the gun up against my head or shoving it in my stomach, destroying my stuff every chance. This is getting out of control. I don't feel safe. Ashley Fonseca posted these exact words on Facebook. Within hours, she was dead, shot by the same man. She was desperately trying to escape, the same man who had been holding guns to her head, just like she warned everyone about. But here's what makes this case absolutely mind-blowing. This wasn't Ashley's first encounter with deadly violence. 25 years earlier, when she was just 10 years old, Ashley survived something that should have killed her. Something so brutal, so random, that it made national headlines and changed Toledo forever. The date was June 25th, 2024, when Ashley made that Facebook post. She was 37 years old, a mother of two boys, living in Boulder Creek Apartments in South Toledo. Her boyfriend, Lawrence Moore, was 46 and had been escalating his threats for weeks. Ashley wasn't just scared. She was documenting everything, desperately trying to create a record of what was happening to her. The post wasn't her first cry for help. Friends and family had watched Lawrence's behavior get worse and worse. He would destroy her belongings during fits of rage. He would threaten to make her children motherless. Most terrifying of all, he had developed a pattern of holding loaded weapons against Ashley's head and stomach during arguments. Ashley knew she was in danger. She was literally spelling it out for anyone who would listen. But sometimes, even when someone tells you exactly what's going to happen to them, the system fails to protect them. Sometimes the warnings are crystal clear, but the help never comes fast enough. If domestic violence stories, like Ashley's, help you recognize warning signs in your own life or someone you care about, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel doesn't just tell you what happened. We break down how these tragedies could have been prevented. We examine the missed opportunities, the failed interventions, and the red flags that everyone ignored. Because understanding these patterns isn't just about true crime entertainment. It's about saving lives. What Ashley couldn't have known was that her death would complete a circle of violence that began when she was a child. A circle that started with another man, another obsession, and another woman who tried desperately to get help before it was too late. Ashley's story isn't just about one night of domestic violence. It's about a pattern that repeated itself across decades, claiming multiple generations of the same family. The morning of June 26, 2024, Ashley Fonseca died from her injuries at Toledo Hospital. Lawrence Moore was already dead, having shot himself immediately after shooting Ashley. But to understand why this case shocked even experienced detectives, you need to know what happened to Ashley 25 years earlier. What happened when she was just a little girl, hiding in her mother's apartment while a madman went on a killing spree that terrorized an entire city. 9 o'clock in the morning on June 25, 2024. Boulder Creek Apartments on South Burn Road in Toledo. Ashley Fonseca's 15-year-old son is getting ready for another summer day when he hears the first gunshot. The teenager doesn't hesitate. He knows exactly what's happening because he's been living with the threats for months. He's watched Lawrence Moore hold guns to his mother's head. He's heard the constant verbal abuse, the promises of violence, the threats to make him and his 7-year-old brother motherless. Now those threats have become reality. The boy grabs his phone and dials 911. His voice is steady, but you can hear the terror underneath as he tells the dispatcher that someone has been shot. He's trying to stay calm for his little brother, who is also in the apartment, witnessing everything. These two children are watching their worst nightmare come true in real time. When Toledo police officers arrive at Boulder Creek Apartments, they find a scene that confirms their worst fears. Lawrence Moore is dead inside the apartment, a single gunshot wound to his chest. He pulled the trigger on himself immediately after shooting Ashley, just like he threatened to do during their arguments. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just execution of the violence he'd been promising for weeks. Ashley is still alive, but barely. She's suffering from at least one gunshot wound, fighting for every breath. The paramedics work frantically to stabilize her before rushing her to Toledo Hospital. Her sons watch as their mother is loaded into an ambulance, not knowing if they'll ever see her alive again. The biological father of Ashley's 7-year-old son arrives at the scene shortly after police. He's the one who will have to explain to a little boy why his mother might not be coming home. He's the one who has to process the fact that his child witnessed a murder-suicide before most kids his age have even learned about violence on television. I was just hugging him and trying to hold him and letting him know everything is going to be okay, he tells news reporters later, his voice breaking. But how do you tell a 7-year-old that everything will be okay when his mother is fighting for her life in a hospital bed? How do you explain that the man who was supposed to protect his family was the one who destroyed it? The father can't stop thinking about Ashley's 15-year-old son having to make that 911 call. Just knowing that he had to be the one to call 911. I can't even imagine, he says. That teenager didn't just witness violence. He became the first responder. He had to take control of a situation that no child should ever have to handle. Meanwhile, at Toledo Hospital, doctors work through the day and night trying to save Ashley's life. She holds on for nearly 24 hours, fighting with everything she has. Maybe she's thinking about her boys, about who will take care of them if she doesn't make it. Maybe she's thinking about all the times she tried to get help, all the warnings she posted on social media, all the people who knew she was in danger but couldn't stop what was coming. On June 26, 2024, Ashley Fonseca loses her fight. She dies from her injuries, leaving behind 2 traumatized children and a community trying to understand how this could have happened when everyone knew she was in danger. Lawrence Moore got exactly what he wanted. If he couldn't have Ashley, nobody could. But Ashley's death isn't just another domestic violence statistic. It's the completion of a cycle that began when she was 10 years old, when another obsessed man decided that if he couldn't have the woman he wanted, he would destroy her entire family. Ashley Fonseca wasn't just another victim of domestic violence. She was a survivor who had already escaped death once before. 25 years earlier, when she was just 10 years old and went by Ashley Morris, she lived through one of Toledo's most violent and terrifying days. A day that left her mother dead, her brother injured, and herself fighting for life with 14 stab wounds covering her small body. The man who tried to kill Ashley as a child wasn't a boyfriend or family member. He was Joe Chappell, a co-worker who had become obsessed with Ashley's mother, Vivian Morris. Just like Lawrence Moore decades later, Chappell couldn't handle rejection. Just like Moore, he had been making threats and stalking his victim for weeks before he finally snapped. Vivian Morris was a young single mother working hard to support her 2 children. She had gone on exactly one date with Joe Chappell, a man from her workplace who seemed interested in her. But when Vivian made it clear she wasn't interested in pursuing a relationship, Chappell couldn't accept her decision. Sound familiar? The parallels are absolutely chilling. Both men worked with their victims. Both became obsessed after minimal romantic contact. Both escalated from harassment to stalking to threats. And both Vivian Morris and her daughter Ashley tried desperately to get help from the system before their attackers finally acted on their promises of violence. Vivian had complained to supervisors at work about Chappell's behavior. She had filed reports with Toledo courts about his stalking. She was doing everything right, following all the proper channels, documenting the harassment just like her daughter would do decades later on Facebook. But the help never came fast enough. February 13th, 1998. Friday the 13th. Joe Chappell drove to the Brook Park Apartments where Vivian lived with 10-year-old Ashley and her younger brother Adam. He came prepared for violence, carrying a large knife that he intended to use on the entire family. Ashley remembers every detail of what happened next, even 25 years later. It still feels fresh, she would tell reporters as an adult. I was old enough to still remember everything. I was 10. I remember everything. Everything. Chappell attacked Ashley first. She was just a little girl, but he stabbed her 14 times without mercy. 14 separate wounds across her tiny body. The trauma damaged her heart, causing mitral valve prolapse that would affect her for the rest of her life. The knife tore through tendons in her arms and legs, requiring multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy. But somehow, impossibly, Ashley survived. Even as a 10-year-old child bleeding from 14 stab wounds, she refused to die. She held on while Chapel moved on to attack her brother Adam, stabbing him multiple times as well. She stayed conscious as he turned his attention to their mother Vivian, inflicting the wounds that would eventually kill her. The three members of the Morris family lay bleeding in their apartment while Joe Chapel made his escape. But unlike Lawrence Moore, who killed himself immediately after shooting Ashley, Chapel was just getting started. What happened next would terrorize the entire city of Toledo and earn the case its nickname, the Trail of Terror. Ashley and Adam were rushed to Toledo Hospital, where doctors worked frantically to save their lives. Their mother Vivian was also transported by ambulance, but her injuries were too severe. She would die from her wounds, leaving her children orphaned and traumatized. But Joe Chapel wasn't finished. He had gone home to get more weapons, and he was planning to make sure his victims didn't survive to testify against him. What he did next shocked even veteran law enforcement officers and turned a domestic violence case into a citywide manhunt. The little girl who survived 14 stab wounds that day grew up to become Ashley Fonseca. She carried the trauma of watching her mother die for 25 years. She knew what obsessive male violence looked like because she had experienced it firsthand as a child. She posted those warnings on Facebook because she recognized the patterns, the escalation, the deadly promises that sounded exactly like what Joe Chapel had been making about her mother. And despite surviving the unsurvivable as a child, despite knowing exactly what these kinds of threats could lead to, Ashley couldn't escape the cycle of violence that had started when she was 10 years old. Joe Chapel left 3 people bleeding in that apartment, but he wasn't done killing. What happened next turned Toledo into a war zone and showed the entire city what happens when obsession turns into pure rage. Chapel had brought a knife to the Morris apartment, but now he was going home to get something much more deadly. While Ashley and Adam Morris fought for their lives in surgery, Chapel returned to his house and grabbed a shotgun. He wasn't planning to run or hide. He was planning to finish what he started, and he knew exactly where his victims were being taken. Toledo Hospital was about to become the next stop on his killing spree. But first, he needed transportation. Chapel drove through Toledo looking for the perfect target, and he found her on the street near his neighborhood. An innocent woman driving alone, completely unaware that a man who had just attempted to murder a family was about to destroy her life too. Chapel approached the woman's car with a shotgun and demanded she get out. This wasn't a robbery. He didn't want money or valuables. He wanted her vehicle so he could track down the ambulances carrying his victims. The woman had no choice but to hand over her keys and watch as the stranger drove away in her car, leaving her stranded and terrified. Now armed with a shotgun and a stolen vehicle, Chapel began hunting the ambulances that were racing Ashley, Adam, and Vivian Morris to the hospital. Think about how calculated this was. He wasn't acting in the heat of passion anymore. He was methodically tracking down wounded children and their dying mother so he could kill them before they could survive their injuries. Chapel found what he was looking for on Toledo streets. The ambulances were rushing toward the hospital, paramedics working desperately to keep the Morris family alive, when Chapel pulled alongside them and opened fire with a shotgun. He was shooting at an ambulance, at paramedics, at children who were already dying from stab wounds. The shots hit their targets. 2 first responders were wounded in the attack, adding more victims to Chappelle's growing list. But the ambulance drivers didn't stop. They kept driving, kept rushing toward the hospital, even as Chapel continued his pursuit. These paramedics risked their own lives to save Ashley and her family, and their courage is the only reason she survived to adulthood. Chapel lost the ambulances in traffic, but he wasn't giving up. He needed another vehicle, something faster and more reliable than the car he had stolen earlier. He drove to a residential neighborhood and spotted 21-year-old Brandy Williams outside her home. She was young, alone, and had no idea that Toledo's most dangerous man was about to target her. Chapel approached Williams with a shotgun and demanded the keys to her truck. But Brandy Williams made a decision that cost her everything. She refused. Maybe she thought she could run into her house and lock the door. Maybe she thought he was bluffing. Maybe she just couldn't process what was happening fast enough to react. Williams turned away from Chapel and tried to go into her home. She made it just a few steps before he pulled the trigger. The shotgun blast hit her in the back, killing her instantly. Brandy Williams died because she happened to own a truck that Joe Chapel wanted. She became his second murder victim of the day, and she wouldn't be his last. Chapel took Williams's truck and continued his rampage. But Toledo police were finally closing in. Sergeant Bob Case had been following the trail of violence all day, and he made a crucial decision that probably saved dozens of lives. Case realized that Chapel might be heading to Toledo Hospital to finish off the Morris family. Case drove to the hospital and searched the parking lot until he found the stolen truck. Chapel was inside the building, armed with a shotgun, looking for the children he had tried to murder hours earlier. If Case hadn't followed his instincts, Chapel might have found Ashley and Adam in their hospital beds and completed his mission. When Chapel came back outside and saw police waiting for him, he knew his killing spree was over. But he wasn't going to surrender. He got behind the wheel of the stolen truck and led police on a high-speed chase through Toledo streets, firing his shotgun at pursuing officers as they tried to stop him. The chase ended at the intersection of Monroe Street and Secker Road, one of Toledo's busiest corners. Chapel crashed the stolen truck and stepped out with his shotgun raised, pointing it directly at the police officers who had been chasing him. Sergeant Bob Case and Officer Jack Smith had no choice but to fire. Multiple shots hit Chapel, ending the trail of terror in the middle of a Toledo intersection. He died exactly where he chose to make his final stand, surrounded by the destruction he had caused throughout the city. The 10-year-old girl he had stabbed 14 times survived. She would grow up, have children of her own, and try to build a life despite the trauma she carried. But 25 years later, history would repeat itself in the most tragic way possible. Ashley Morris spent 25 years trying to escape the shadow of what happened to her as a child. She underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage from 14 stab wounds. She lived with heart problems caused by the trauma to her chest. She carried scars across her body that reminded her every day of the violence that took her mother's life. But Ashley was determined to break the cycle. She got tattoos to honor her survival and her mother's memory. One on her hand showed she was a survivor. Another on her shoulder bore her mother's name, Vivian, keeping her close even in death. She had detailed artwork on her left arm dedicated to a baby she lost, another tragedy in a life that had seen too much pain too early. Ashley became a mother herself, having 2 sons who meant everything to her. DeAndre, 15, and D'Angelo, 7. She talked to them about their grandmother constantly, making sure they knew how much Vivian would have loved them if she had lived to meet them. Ashley was trying to give her boys the stability and love that had been stolen from her own childhood. For years, it seemed like Ashley might actually succeed in building a different kind of life. She stayed in Toledo, close to the cemetery where her mother and baby were buried in the same plot. She found strength in visiting them, in keeping their memory alive, in proving that Joe Chapel hadn't destroyed everything when he went on his killing spree. But trauma has a way of making people vulnerable to the same patterns that hurt them before. Ashley had survived one obsessed man's violence as a child, and now she found herself trapped with another one as an adult. Lawrence Moore's behavior was escalating in exactly the same way Joe Chappelle's had 25 years earlier. The threat started small and grew more serious over time. Moore would destroy Ashley's belongings during arguments, just like Chapel had escalated from workplace harassment to stalking. Moore began threatening to punch Ashley in the face and knock out her teeth, promising to make her children motherless. The exact same threat that Joe Chapel had carried out against Ashley's own mother. Most terrifying of all, Moore developed a habit of holding loaded weapons against Ashley's head and stomach during their fights. This wasn't just domestic violence. This was a man who was planning to kill her, just like she had seen happen to her mother. Ashley knew exactly what these signs meant because she had lived through them before. Ashley's Facebook post wasn't just a cry for help. It was a desperate attempt to create the kind of documentation that might have saved her mother's life. Vivian Morris had complained to supervisors and filed court reports about Joe Chappelle's stalking, but it hadn't been enough. Ashley thought that putting her fears in writing, posting them publicly where everyone could see, might finally get someone to take action. She was documenting the threats because she knew how this story could end. She had watched it happen before, when she was 10 years old and powerless to stop it. Now she was 37, a grown woman with her own children to protect. But she was still trapped in the same cycle of violence that had defined her entire life. The parallels between what happened to Vivian Morris in 1998 and Ashley Fonseca in 2024 are absolutely devastating. Both women followed every rule society tells victims to follow. Both documented the harassment. Both reached out for help through official channels. Both made their danger crystal clear to anyone who would listen. Yet both died anyway. Vivian Morris filed workplace complaints against Joe Chappell when he wouldn't accept her rejection. She went to Toledo courts and documented his stalking behavior. She told her neighbors about her fears. She even called police on the day she died, telling them Chappell was outside her apartment right then, but officers told her to call back if he actually did something threatening. Ashley Fonseca used social media to document Lawrence Moore's escalating threats. She posted publicly about him holding guns to her head and stomach. She described his promises to make her children motherless. She spelled out exactly what was going to happen to her, creating a digital trail that should have triggered immediate intervention. Both women died because the system treats domestic violence as a private matter between couples instead of recognizing it as a public safety crisis. Police told Vivian to call back if her stalker actually did something. Nobody responded to Ashley's Facebook post with concrete action to remove her from danger. The technology changed between 1998 and 2024, but the response didn't. We went from telling women to document threats on paper to telling them to document threats online, but we still aren't acting on that documentation fast enough to save lives. Ashley's case shows us that surviving childhood trauma doesn't protect you from becoming a victim again. If anything, trauma survivors may be more vulnerable to predators who recognize their patterns. The system failed both generations of the Morris family, and Ashley's sons are now growing up with the same trauma their mother carried for 25 years. Ashley Fonseca survived 14 stab wounds as a 10-year-old child, only to die from gunshot wounds as a 37-year-old mother. The violence that claimed her mother's life in 1998 completed its circle in 2024, proving that trauma doesn't just hurt individuals. It destroys entire family lines across generations. Her sons, DeAndre and D'Angelo, are now living with relatives, carrying the same burden Ashley carried for 25 years. They watched their mother die, just like she watched her mother die. The cycle continues unless we finally start listening when someone tells us they're about to be killed. Subscribe if you believe these stories matter, because ignoring the warning signs costs lives. Comment below and tell me, have you ever seen red flags that everyone chose to ignore? Because Ashley's story proves that sometimes the most obvious warnings are the ones we fail to hear.